Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down big ideas. Today, we're diving into a fascinating intellectual story, how ancient Greek philosophy actually provided the building blocks for early Christian theology. So let's start with a puzzle. How on earth did early Christianity, this new and often persecuted faith, manage to explain its really complex ideas and ultimately win over the mind of an empire steeped in the super sophisticated philosophy of the Greeks? Well, the answer is pretty remarkable. You see, early Christian thinkers didn't just reject Greek philosophy. Instead, they became its most discerning editors. They selectively adapted it to build their very own intellectual framework and explain their faith to a world that was frankly pretty skeptical. Okay, let's dive in. To really get how this happened, we first have to understand the dominant philosophical operating system of the time. Think of it like the intellectual software everyone was running. And that was Neo-Platonism, a school of thought most famously laid out by the philosopher Plotinus. So Plotinus saw all of reality as this grand three-tiered hierarchy. At the very top, you have the One, this perfect, pure, unknowable source of absolutely everything. Flowing out from it is the nous, which you can think of as the divine mind, holding the perfect blueprint for everything that could ever exist. And then from the nous flows the world soul, and its job is to actually organize and bring our physical universe to life based on that blueprint. So how does this all happen? How does one thing flow from the other? Plotinus had this really elegant idea he called emanation. The best way to picture it is like light pouring out from the sun. The light is a product of the sun, for sure, but it doesn't make the sun itself any smaller or weaker. In the same way, each layer of reality just sort of overflows from the one above it, without ever draining that original source. Now, this whole cosmic map wasn't just some abstract theory about the universe. It also gave a really powerful story for the journey of every single human soul. You see, for Plotinus, every one of our souls is caught in this kind of cosmic tug of war. The higher soul is always being drawn upward, toward reason, toward the divine. But the lower soul, well, it's constantly being pulled downward, getting tangled up in the needs, the fears, and the desires of the physical body. And what happens when that lower half wins the tug of war? That's what Plotinus called the fall of the soul. Now, this is a really key point. This is not the same as the later Christian idea of original sin. For Plotinus, the fall wasn't some big one-time event in a garden. It's a personal mistake. It's you or me misplacing our focus on the temporary, material stuff and losing sight of our connection to what's eternal. This way of thinking also offered a really brilliant explanation for why evil exists. It wasn't some kind of dark, independent force. Instead, Plotinus saw two kinds of evil. First, there's what he called primary evil, which is really just natural imperfection. You know, a rotting apple. It's not evil in a moral sense, it's just a less perfect version of a fresh apple. But then there's secondary evil, and that is moral evil. That comes from our own choices, when we knowingly choose the lower material path over the higher spiritual one. So the whole point of life, the good life, was to reverse that fall. It was all about this mystical climb back up the ladder. You do it by turning inward, away from all the bodily distractions, and focusing your mind on higher truths to, hopefully, eventually, reunite with that divine source, the One. Okay, so now that we've got this incredibly sophisticated worldview, which was, the intellectual air people were breathing, let's see how it presented both a huge challenge and a massive opportunity for the early Christian church. This famous question from the church father Tertullian, it just nails the central conflict, right? Jerusalem stood for faith, for revelation, for Hebrew tradition. Athens stood for reason, logic, Greek philosophy. Could they even coexist, and more importantly, should they? And one of the biggest things forcing an answer was this really popular rival movement called Gnosticism. The Gnostics took some of these Greek ideas and ran with them to an extreme. They basically argued that since our material world is so flawed and full of suffering, the God who created it must be some lesser, evil, or maybe just incompetent being, and definitely not the true all-good God. So what did the Christian thinkers do? Faced with Gnosticism and the undeniable power of Greek thought, they didn't just throw it all out. Instead, they acted like those careful editors we talked about, creating a new theology by meticulously picking and choosing which Greek ideas to keep and which to throw away. And they found a ton of value in Platonic concepts that just clicked beautifully with their own beliefs. Ideas like a single supreme God, an immortal soul that's separate from the body, and maybe most importantly, this concept of a divine logos. See, in Greek thought, the logos was this universal reason that ordered the entire cosmos. Early Christians saw this and had a light bulb moment, identifying the logos with Christ, the divine word that brought creation into being. At the same time, though, they drew some very hard lines in the sand. There were ideas that flat out contradicted their core beliefs. So they completely rejected the idea that souls existed before their bodies, or that they'd be reincarnated. And crucially, they rejected the idea that matter itself was eternal. They insisted, no, God created the universe ex nihilo, out of nothing. So you see, this wasn't just some haphazard cutting and pasting. It wasn't a philosophical quilt. It was a brilliant strategic adaptation. They were using the philosophical language that their audience already knew and understood to explain and defend specifically Christian truths. It made their new faith intellectually tough and, at the same time, relatable. And this synthesis, this merger of Athens and Jerusalem, wasn't just some clever short-term strategy. It ended up having a profound and lasting impact on the entire course of Western thought. Think about it. By borrowing this ready-made philosophical toolkit, early Christian thinkers didn't have to start from scratch. They could suddenly articulate incredibly complex ideas about God, the soul, and morality with a speed and a level of sophistication that would have been pretty much impossible otherwise. And this move set a powerful precedent. For centuries to come, Western theology would keep doing this, using the dominant philosophy of the day as its intellectual partner. You see it with Thomas Aquinas using Aristotle in the Middle Ages, or John Calvin drawing on Stoicism during the Reformation. It just became a core part of how theology was done. And that brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought. This ancient encounter between Athens and Jerusalem, it didn't just shape history, it's still echoing today. The very language we use to talk about faith, reason, the soul, and our place in the universe is still, in so many ways, built on the foundations laid by this brilliant, strategic merger of two powerful worlds.